Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Johnny, and if this is the first time we're meeting on my channel, I help crime enthusiasts understand the inner workings of criminal investigations by kind of peeling back the curtain and getting behind and showing you guys what investigators do. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. All right, today's video, I'm going to talk about the recent case of the MURDAUGH murders in South Carolina. I'm not going to go through the whole story on how these murders happen. What I'm going to focus on this video is about the evidence and some of the things that the defense is trying to get thrown out. So I'm just going to talk about that one specific thing and see if I can help you guys understand exactly what's going on with the evidence. Now, what happened was in these murders, Alec MURDAUGH has been arrested and charged for murdering his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. They were both murdered on the property that they own. So, and they get a 911 call from Alec MURDAUGH, who says he found his wife and son dead. He's very hysteric on the 911 call, and you can find that online anywhere if you want to listen to that. Investigators roll up. They see him. There's body cam footage of the shirt that he's wearing, and they start their investigation. So they take his shirt at that point, and they're gonna process that for evidence. Okay. So this happens on June 7th, 2021. June 8th, the SLED investigators, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, tests the shirt for gunshot residue. That's a residue that you get from the gun and the powder going into the air, and it sticks on clothes, hands, so on and so forth. So they test it for gunshot residue, GSR, and they find 3 particles. But in their report, they say this is consistent with being transferred and holding on or handling a gun, not so much shooting the gun. Now, the next day, June 9th, from the hem of the shirt that they seized, because they took the shirt from Mr. MURDAUGH, it was seized that night, and they cut a small sample out, and they do a phenolphthalein test. And phenolphthalein is a presumptive test for blood. Now, it doesn't say it's a test for human blood or animal blood. It just says there's a presence of blood. Now, there's other things that can cause this presumptive test to react, because it turns pink when you start to test it. Now, they will do a control, and I won't get into what a control is, but basically it's a control that says you test something you know doesn't have blood on it, and it shouldn't produce a positive result. You test something that you know has blood on it, and it should produce a good positive test. That tells you that the kit, the actual kit in the test, is working because it's been tested on controlled samples. Okay, so they do this. And what do they find? They get a positive presumptive test for blood. They send it in for DNA analysis at that point. Now, it's been pretty much agreed upon that this position and where this blood was located was a transfer pattern of blood. So what SLED does is they issue a report, and what the report says was that it was positive for Maggie's DNA and that Paul was not a contributor in that part of it. So July 7th, the captains and lieutenants of SLED get together, and they want to talk about the shirt. One of them is concerned that there's a lack of blood showing, at least on the photographs, which he states, one of them states, was some poor photographs that were taken of it. So now they want to discuss that a little bit more, because obviously a lot of their case depends on what is on this shirt that the arrested person, Alec MURDAUGH, is wearing. If you can't see it because of the photographs, it gets a little concerning. So let me show you a picture of what they're talking about here. So this is the picture of the shirt that was taken. Now, I don't know if there was any more photos taken of this shirt or if this is the only one, but the lighting is not good. It's not flat. It's not 90 degrees. And as a professional photographer for 17 years doing commercial work as well, this is just not really, in my opinion, laid out too well. I mean, you can hardly even see anything, and the color's not right. There's no color balance, so on and so forth. So I can see why they're a little concerned with that, because quite frankly, you could take 2 strobe lights, bounce them off the ceiling, whatever, control the temperature of the light, have a gray card, get the right temperature, lay it more flat out, pin it if you have to make that thing exactly flat. I have a boom that goes over that looks straight down onto evidence, right? You can zoom in, you have a zoom lens. I usually have a laptop tethered in so I can see the image really, really super big, and it doesn't take long to set that up. My mobile kit takes me probably 10 minutes to set up when I'm traveling. So there's a way to do that. Not only that, can you get the overall, and then you start to get the closer up photos. You can get the macro photos of the certain areas of the shirt. If you think there's, back spatter or high velocity mist or spatter on a shirt, you can start getting more close-ups of that. There's no ruler in here to tell you how big it is. There's no AVFO that's doing micro shots on here that I can see. This is the only one that was in the affidavit to squash everything about this case, okay, or about this piece of evidence. So I don't know if there's more. I'm hoping there's more, but I'm not. According to the affidavit, there may not be any more. You can even get so close as to get microscopic shots, like 50 power. Let me show you what I have here at my house. So this is a tool that I use. This is called a Pro Scope, and it's got a 50 power lens on there. And let me show you how powerful this is now. I'm going to stick this on my arm, and hopefully you can see this. Hair follicles. Gets all the way down into hair follicles. All right? On the ring, this is on my wedding ring here. You start to see gouges. You see how beat up this thing is from so many years of wearing it. This camera, this 50 power, can get on these 1, 2, 3 millimeter blood droplets, so this mist on there to take these photos. So the technology is out there for these investigators to take super, super good photographs, all right? Don't know why it was done, and hopefully there's more that they have to go on, but that's basically them saying we're not seeing enough, so let's go on to some different testing, all right? So they continue on with a different kind of test. So they continue on with a statement that they don't have a blood pattern analysis on staff. So they know a guy named Deputy Kinsey, who's now a chief deputy at another department, and he is a blood spatter analysis. Has a great resume. So they're going to reach out to him to look at this as well. But in the meantime, they are going to do a different kind of test because, according to the defense, they couldn't see the blood, and they're like, well, if it's a white shirt and blood is red, why can't you see it? Why are you doing some different tests? But they're told that their crime scene division or serology division that they have there is going to now re-examine the shirt. And so they use a leucocrystal violet. We're going to call it LCV from here on out, and they're going to see if they're going to spray this on the shirt to see if this illuminates the shirt, turns it a violet, because it is a presumptive test of blood as well. All right, so it's almost like luminol, but it's there to identify blood patterns better. Now they've got authority or permission to do this LCV test on the shirt. At that time, Deputy Kinsey, who's they reached out to about looking at the shirt for analysis, says, yeah, I'll agree to do that. So now they take the shirt, they take it, they spread it out, they photograph it, and then they spray it. So this is what it looks like when they spray it and they pull it out. It is sprayed. You can see the color of the chemical that is reacting. It's catalyzed with the hemoglobin and the oxidation. It's now giving this a little bit more detail as far as what the eye can totally see. So this is their first thing they do with the shirt, all right? Now what do is they take this shirt and they lay it out in kind of a grid format, right? So they can identify certain sections of the shirt that they want to analyze. They draw some lines around some shirts for a cutting out of the pattern because they want to take those cutouts and submit them to the lab for testing. So that's exactly what they do. They cut these things out of the shirt and they send them off. Okay, so now they're going to issue a report. SLED is going to issue a report on the findings of the DNA analysis. I'm going to read you just an excerpt from that. One cutting from the back of the shirt tested positive for Maggie's DNA. Paul was excluded as a DNA contributor for that cutting that was on the back. One of the cuttings from the front bottom portion of the skirt or the shirt, which the state admits are not spatter, tested. One tested positive for Paul's DNA while excluding Maggie as a contributor. One tested positive for Maggie's DNA while excluding Paul, and the third tested positive for Maggie without excluding Paul. The cuttings from the upper 2/3 of the front of the shirt, which the state claims are spatter from shooting Paul, generally tested positive for Maggie's DNA. Okay, so we have DNA, but do we have blood? On August 10th, SLED takes some sub-cuttings from the larger cuttings and does a hemotrace test. Now, a hemotrace test is not a presumptive test, but it actually tests for human or advanced primates blood. So they can say it's not animal. This is definitely human blood. So they're going to do now this test on the sub stuff that they have. This is a highly sensitive test. It can test down to micrograms in blood to make sure that it's actually human. It's very, very highly sensitive. And here's what the defense says based on the results. Every cutting that SLED did and wrote the report on tested negative for blood. Negative for blood. DNA? Yes. Negative for blood. Now, the defense is probably going to say, well, of course it's got Maggie's DNA. She does the laundry. She's folding the stuff and putting it away. So why wouldn't Maggie's DNA be on the shirt? This is probably some of the stuff the defense will say. All right. But the hemostat test detected no blood. So SLED basically says we need a blood pattern analysis specialist. So they do some research. They find Tom Bevel, who's respected in the community. And they reach out and say, we want to secure your services to do some blood pattern analysis on our case. All right, so Tom responds back and gives them their pricing. And now they're going to secure Tom Bevel as their prosecuting expert witness. So a week later, investigation continues. And now they're going to test for blood on the seatbelt. I'm assuming it's a seatbelt for Alex MURDAUGH on his vehicle. So what do? They're gonna the captains, lieutenants say, all right, here's what we're gonna do. You can spray it with LCV to see if there is blood there, just to detect it, but we're not gonna do the hemotrace test at all. We're just gonna send it in for DNA, and that's what we're gonna do. Now the defense is like, well, why would you do that? You know, because now you're scared. You did a hemotrace on the shirt and you got negative blood. Why wouldn't you do a hemotrace on the seatbelt and get negative blood too? But the department, and they have that right to say, all right, we detected blood, let's send it off to the lab for DNA. So that was the decision that the captains made at that time. So it continues. They decide a couple weeks later to secure Mr. Bevel to be the expert witness. They contact him. He says, yep, send all the stuff over, send it to this address. They once again put his home address, and on the darn motion, they put a picture of his house, which I think there's no reason for it. It's just a jab, I think, at the Attorney General's office to post this kind of stuff. There's no need to do that. So anyway, Tom Bevel says, send everything over. They came back and said, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to send it through evidence.com, and you can just download everything there, and that way it's nice and secure. So that's the process that they want to start doing. So January 4th, evidence.com link is sent to Mr. Bevel with all of the case file and all of the documents. The hemotrace test was not given to him at that time that said it was tested and there was no evidence of blood. So Mr. Bevel gets all the information and does his analysis. A month later, Tom Bevel issues this report, part of his report. Stains on the white T-shirt are consistent with transfers and not backspatter from a bullet wound. Emphasis in original. This is his initial original report. This initial report also opines that he would expect little to no spatter on the shooter or his or her clothing resulting from the shooting of Paul, and none resulting from the shooting of Maggie. Mr. Bevel further opines, quote, for there is to be little or no backspatter on the shooter or their clothing is certainly possible for this incident. So in his initial report, what is he saying? He's saying, yes, the stains are consistent with transfer patterns and not backspatter from a bullet wound, is basically what he's saying. So that is the initial report that gets submitted to SLED. And this is where things began to take a little bit of a turn in the conversations with Mr. Bevel and SLED and what the defense is alleging. So it starts to get a little cloudy through here. So let me take you through it. Okay, so investigators get the report, they look at it, and now they want to have a conversation with Mr. Bevel. So they schedule a Zoom call. Something happens on the Zoom call, and Mr. Bevel says, well, I want to take a look at the shirt. So the two lieutenants go get the shirt. This is like a week later or so. They look at the shirt, and they see that it is the picture that I showed you earlier. This is what the shirt looks like. Lieutenants are like, man, this thing is ruined. I wonder if he would even want to look at this shirt. So what do they do is they take a picture with a cell phone, send it to Bevel, say, this is the shirt. Is it of any evidentiary value to you still to look at? He's like, if I'm going to testify, I want to make sure that I say that I actually looked at the shirt. So he says, just ship it to my house. They say, no, we're not going to ship it due to chain of custody. We're going to make sure it's in our possession. So we'll actually drive it out to you for you to look at. So that's where it continues to go from there. So prior to investigators going out to Bevel's residence in Oklahoma, he sends them an email and he says, hey, listen, I'm assuming there's larger photos, larger size photos with more detail, like a raw photo, so on and so forth, that you could possibly send me, because the ones that you sent me are JPEGs and they're pretty low resolution. I'm having a hard time kind of zooming in. And not only that, there should be some original photos in big raw format taken right after the chemical was applied that I could take a look at that as well. Can you see if you can find those, as well as some notes from the lab that helps me kind of understand what their process was? Investigators are like, yeah, no problem. We'll try to get that to you. So he's like, yeah, I'm still looking at it. I think I see some spatter there, but with some bigger, better photos that are raw data on there, I could look at these a whole lot better and identify them using some software. So they say, we're going to look into that, and that's what they do. So they get some information, they get the shirt, and apparently they go out to Oklahoma and they deliver the shirt to him out there. So Bevel sends them an email back and says, thanks for the notes. They're super helpful in me understanding the processing and the examination that was done. Okay, so now that Bevel has looked at the shirt, they've delivered that. They've delivered apparently a CD of photos. He sends an email back to investigators, and this is what he says. Hey, with the large CD format, we were able to filter the colors of the shirt using Photoshop, focusing on red, blood, and blue, LCV, and the white of the shirt, that now there are over 100 plus pattern stains. And bottom line, I don't see any other mechanism to get so many misting stains onto his shirt other than spatter created from a shotgun wounding of Paul. That is his email back to them. So basically, Mr. Bevel gives a report first is saying no spatter, not likely, to now there's 100 plus spatter patterns that would result in killing of Paul and the back spatter because of gravity. There's more of the report like gravity and shooting up and it coming back down on him, that he would expect to see that. And now that he's been able to enhance it with better raw images, he's able to see it better and therefore make a different opinion that he couldn't have done before with poor photographs and just looking at it basically online. So when you continue on with that, the investigators say, hey, did you do a peer review on that? Which is very common for us in the investigative field to do a peer review. If you're doing a crash investigation or a murder or any kind of analysis, you want your peers to review it. There's apparently another guy that is in his firm that did a peer review that he said that he did. And he said, well, I was expecting 5 or 6 people. He said, no, he just went through for grammatical errors and stuff like that. But I did have 6 people that did the peer review, and we all came up with the same analysis that from the 2/3 up was spatter and the bottom 1/3 was a transfer stain. Now, according to the defense, they never listed any of the names of the people that did their peer review. So that's one of their other contentions, is that wasn't included in the report as well. So what's the defense doing? They're saying, hey, these 2 reports are a little bit different. A lot of this stuff is the same, but your analysis is different. There's a mannequin in one now about body positions on the second one. And now they're alleging that it was leaked to the media, and therefore it puts us prejudice on Mr. MURDAUGH, because they're saying, hey, this impact spatter happened, and now in the public eye, you're already guilty when there's a presumption of innocence. So they are not happy about this. So they start to request a little more information and documents on stuff that isn't in the final reports. So now there's all this back and forth about what was in the report, wasn't in the report, hemotrace tests that were done that were kind of lumped into that the defense initially had to discover. It wasn't kind of out front for them. So now they're kind of going back and forth with Bevel and the Attorney General, and it's a big mess on trying to get their data. So the defense is basically saying, hey, all the stuff that you used for your analysis, we want it. We're compelling you to do that. So they end up going to the court and saying, hey, I'm compelling them to give me all the stuff they said they used. And that's where kind of the beef goes back and forth about what the defense has or what the prosecution has and what Bevel has, and trying to get that back to the defense for discovery and reexamination. So as this continues, December 1st, Bevel gets the results from the hemotrace test, which is negative for blood. So now discussions are happening. Defense wants to see things and wants to hear things from Bevel. Basically, Attorney General says, hey, you need to get back to the defense about this issue. Bevel says, hey, I've had some family issues, some family problems. Let's schedule that to December 21st. And I always honor requests for defense to kind of do that stuff. So now they're getting the more information on the hemostat test, which is basically they tested after the LCV test, and it tests negative for blood. So what happens is Bevel orders his own kit, and he gets some expired blood, and he's going to do a test on his own. Now, this is not uncommon for forensic people to do testing on their own. I've been to conferences where they've taken, donated blood and done tests and examples and stuff right in front of people live in a conference. So, for them to say this is kind of weird for Bevel, they called it like a science fair experiment. That's what the defense calls it. But you can do experiments on your own as a blood spatter analyst. It's not a problem in the field. It's commonly done. So anyway, Bevel gets these kits, and he's going to try to do his own, he does his own, basically, examination and scientific test of this. So the defense goes on and says, hey, this guy's doing this experiment in his house. And, for me, house is probably not the best place to do it unless you don't have an office and you have your own laboratory, in your house, which is not uncommon. I've seen forensic analysts have their own laboratory that's separate from their house, like an outbuilding or a space dedicated for that. So they're all upset about Bevel doing this, but they don't know what Bevel has in his house. All right. So be that as it may, if it was done in a lab or a different sterile setting, that's probably would have been better for Bevel, but it doesn't really matter. He does this test on his own. Okay. So what does Bevel do? Bevel gets expired human blood. He gets a shirt. He gets an LCV test, and he gets a hemotrace test. And so he is going to conduct his own experiment. So he takes the shirt. He sprays the mist on there just like it would be for high velocity mist. He sprays the LCV on there to identify the blood and get it to turn a purplish color. And then he takes a hemotrace test and tests it for human blood. And what his experiments told him was that the hemotrace test results were negative. And let me show you one of the tests that he did here. So this was one of the things he submitted. And what the defense is saying is, hey, look at this. He has a diagram on the left going, all right, here's the shirt. He sprayed it. And now we're going to cut that for an HT test after an LCV test. But then the photo on the right has the actual test where it has the number 2 in the right corner there. If it's one line, it's negative. If it's 2 lines, it's positive for blood. And this says negative for blood. But you look at the pattern of the blood on that shirt, and it doesn't look like it's the same exact area that was tested. So it's kind of a weird comparison. It's like you didn't cut the one spot out and then put the photo on the right, comparing it with the test. I'm not sure what the photo means in that, but in reality, he says it's always going to be a negative test after LCV. However, the defense has articles and professional journals, academic journals that say, look at these tests. They did the same thing. They sprayed things with blood, LCV, and did a hemotrace test, and it was positive for blood. So Bevel is basically saying whatever the lab did was wrong because my results were it's always negative and the lab was negative. But he's like, it was positive because I actually sprayed the blood. I knew there was blood. I put blood on there, and the test was still negative because of that. So it doesn't really matter if it's negative because it could still be blood. Is basically what he's saying. So that is the pull. Now there is some back and forth at the defense, basically in this motion that says, hey, listen, he didn't take any high-res photos of what he did. He didn't do a step-by-step photo. He didn't tell me what things he identified and what he measured. That really wasn't broken down well. The only thing he gave us was a couple screenshotted photos and a PowerPoint presentation, but not the original documents that he did and not the step-by-step notes and all the breakdown that he did to come up with this analysis is basically what they're alleging in the affidavit. So now there's a back and forth with this whole defense and Bevel and the Attorney General's office because they're like, well, give me all the stuff you used. Give me all the stuff you used. Now there's a delay. Now it's getting into Christmas time and they're trying to appease the defense. And finally it's like Bevel goes, finally he gets he can't transfer because there's so much data. So he goes out and buys an external drive, and they send it over to the AG's office, and then the AG's office gets it over to the defense, who looks at it and basically says, hey, I got it. There's a lot of data on here, but there's no raw files that you said were used in identifying the blood spatter, and there's no Photoshop files in there that you said you used to enhance with the red and the blues, the green and the white to zoom in on it. So the stuff that we asked for, you gave us the data, but the stuff you testified to or wrote in your report isn't in there. So now they're still not happy. So as this continues on, Deputy Kinsey, who was also talked to earlier about looking at the physical evidence, now he's brought into the picture, and he's going to do some analysis on his own. But now the defense is like, well, he's just going to read Bevel's report and kind of regurgitate what he says, so on and so forth. That's what he's saying. But if Kinsey's going to do his own investigation, he's going to do his own report, he's going to do whatever he says on it. So that's what the prosecution is probably saying. Hey, here's all the evidence. You look at it and you give us your report as well. Just in case the Bevel thing doesn't work out in court, at least we have your expert opinion as well. So Kinsey submits a detailed report. I've looked at the report, and it's pretty detailed. I mean, he talks about the entire property and angles and different things like that. And I'm going to just read you part of what the excerpt was from Kinsey's report that the defense put in their affidavit. Quote, the smaller stains, this is what Kinsey wrote. He said, Deputy Kinsey repeats Mr. Bevel's phrase about 100 plus stains, then opines, quote, the smaller stains that are present after treatment with LCV appear to be high velocity impact stains, only caused by a gunshot or high speed machinery. But then he pivots 180 degrees to conclude, quote, after consideration of the original opinion, analysis, reporting, and follow-up experimentation, this expert cannot render an opinion on IQ4 above. And then the defense says, Deputy Kinsey is unwilling to render on whether the blood stains on Alex's white T-shirt are spatter from a gunshot because he knows a T-shirt tested negative for human blood. So he's saying basically Kinsey looked at the report, gave his analysis, but says, I can't render an opinion on your question if that's blood stains on Alex's white T-shirt because it tested negative. So he's he's leaving himself a back door. So then it just continues on. This affidavit just continues on with basically saying he can't testify. He can't be an expert witness. You're quoting all sorts of case law that basically says, hey, you're not complying with our order from a judge. First it was oral, then it was written, basically saying, I'm ordering you to provide all these documents. And so they're not providing him. They're not providing him. He gives them this drive that doesn't have what they need on it. No raw files, no Photoshop files. So they're still going down and saying, hey, you're not giving us what we want. Therefore, if you're not complying with this court order, you can't be an expert witness because you're not providing us stuff that we can use for the defense of our client. So that is it's a whole can of worms, let me tell you. So in essence, they're basically trying to get the entire expert opinion totally thrown out, and the examination of the shirt that was done by the lab is the only thing that's left. And that Kinsey can't testify because he's not willing to say it's blood spatter. Bevel is, but they're saying we can't use Bevel because he's not complying with the court order, and he's changed his report, and he's saying he used this part to do his analysis, but he's not showing us, he's not giving us what he used to do that, and he's not giving us the high-speed photos of the notes that he did that. So I don't know how this whole thing is going to fare out in trial, if this is even going to get brought up, if the Attorney General is even going to try to introduce it, but I don't need to see how he's not. I mean, this seems like a big piece of evidence. So whether he uses Bevel and just says, let's go for it, or he uses Kinsey and says, let's go for it. I would hate to see it. If this is actual high-speed velocity miss, if this is back spatter from the murder weapon, it's on his clothes, I would hate to see that not come into play, especially if it is. But it's going to be tough. We're just going to have to stay tuned and see. But anyway, I wanted to give you my opinion on what I saw and when I read the reports and kind of what's going on behind the scenes, in case we never ever hear about it in court. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you are available to definitely hit me up over on Twitter. You can always hit me on Twitter. Follow me over there. You can also hit me up here on YouTube if you're not following so well. And I also have an Instagram, so you can follow me on Instagram as well. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in, and leave your questions in the comment box below. I will try to answer them as best as I can with the information that I have. Like I said, I don't have all the police reports. I haven't read all the detail. This is just a motion from the defense. And, you know, the defense kind of blows things up all the time. And so I have to take that into consideration because law enforcement, you know, they're going to do their due diligence just like they want to do. But we're all going to see it when it comes into court and what's introduced and what isn't introduced. So we're all in the same boat as far as that's concerned. So anyway, that's all I have for you guys too. And I will see you on the next video.